Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 980 for November 27th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
So while Dublin and Cork distilleries are still doing white labels and still selling their whiskey in barrel to pubs and etc. and third-party bottlers, the likes of Dunville are creating worldwide brands. Because the more whiskey you have, the more pressure's on the sales guy to sell it. So you have to create a brand, a worldwide brand. So Dunville's was one of the first true worldwide brands in Irish whiskey.
That's Jarlath Watson of Northern Ireland's Echlinville Distillery, the keepers of the Dunville's legacy. Earlier this month, the Dunville's 21-year-old Palo Cortado finish won Irish Whiskey of the Year honors in the Irish Whiskey Awards. We'll spend some time at Echlinville with Jarlath Watson on this week's Whiskey Cast in Depth. The coming year is set to be a big one for Echlinville as it looks to release its own first whiskey since opening in 2013. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more, all on this week's Whiskey Cast.
And now, a Thanksgiving message from Robin Redbreast.
What am I thankful for? Being on the smaller end of the bird scale.
Happy Thanksgiving from Redbreast, proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Gabriel Cardarelli here with Dewar's Scotch Whiskey, bringing you the perfect gift idea for the holidays or any occasion. How about a Dewar's custom label or personalized bottle? More in a bit.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. It's rare that the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to hear a case involving whiskey and dog toys, but that's the case as the justices have agreed to hear Brown-Forman's appeal of lower court rulings that a Bad Spaniel's dog toy does not infringe on its trademarks for Jack Daniels. Lower courts ruled that the toy is a humorous parody that would not cause any consumer confusion, but Brown-Forman and industry trade groups make the argument that would open the door for kids' toys and other kinds of products using its trademarks, as long as there's humor or parody involved. The claim is that would make it harder for the industry to target its marketing only toward adults of legal drinking age. Arguments in the case are expected in the 2023 court term. Also from the courts, Conor McGregor is being sued for millions of euro over the sale last year of proper No. 12 Irish whiskey to Proximo Spirits. His former sparring partner, Artem Lobov, claims that he came up with the idea for proper No. 12 and convinced McGregor to move ahead with the brand, but the Independent reports Lobov claims he was squeezed out as sales of proper No. 12 took off. He claims he's owed 5% of McGregor's share of the $600 million Proximo paid last year for majority ownership of Proper 12. McGregor's spokesperson denies that Lobov had any role in the brand's creation. Look for the case to be heard in Dublin's High Court next year. In other news, plans have been approved for what would be Isla's 13th distillery. Argyll and Bute Council has granted planning permission for the island's smallest distillery to be located near Port Charlotte. The Herald reports Iliac's Scott McClellan and Bertie Nesselrode are behind the new distillery. It would have a capacity of just 200,000 liters of alcohol per year. They're hoping to produce the first whiskey at the end of 2024 or early 2025. Now, depending on how you feel about whiskey as an investment, this could be seen as either good news or a sign that the bubble is about to burst. Scottish investment bank Noble & Company cites strong investor demand has pushed the value of rare single malts up by more than 20% this year, while major stock indices are trading flat. The Financial Times reports the bank has tracked a decade's worth of whiskey auctions and cites the growth in auction sales as being driven by bottle prices between £100 and £1,000, not those high-priced bottles. That's being seen as a sign that younger investors and those seeking tangible assets are jumping into whiskey as an investment, and the bank's Duncan McFadzean says there's no indication yet that inflation and market turmoil are hurting demand for whiskey. Yet. We have another departure to report this week. Westward Whiskey co-founder and master distiller Christian Krogstad has stepped back from day-to-day operations at the Portland distillery. He started the distillery in 2004 as House Spirits and will continue to produce his Krogstad Aquavit at the distillery, along with pursuing other interests. It's Icons of Whiskey time again, and Whiskey Magazine's annual awards kicked off this week with the unveiling of Ireland's regional Icons of Whiskey. Irish Distillers was named Distiller of the Year, while Blackwater Distillery was named Craft Producer of the Year. Middleton Distillery was named the Sustainable Distillery of the Year, and Powerscourt Distillery was named the Visitor Attraction of the Year. Those are just a few of the winners. We have a link to the complete list in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Finally, we have a sad note to report this week. Former Whiskey Magazine editor and longtime whiskey writer Dominic Roscrow passed away suddenly last Sunday. Dom edited Whiskeria and Whiskey Quarterly magazines as well during his career and wrote several highly regarded books on whiskey. He also created the Wizards of Whiskey competition to showcase emerging whiskeys from around the world. He was a good friend over the years and a regular guest on WhiskyCast during those years when he was editing Whiskey Magazine in the early years of the show. Our condolences go out to his wife, Sally, their 3 children, and all of Dom's friends in the whiskey fabric. Dominic Roscrow was just 61 years old. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Our live Friday night webcasts will return after the holidays, but you can catch up with on-demand replays right now at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. The debut of Whiskey Fest Las Vegas is this Thursday night at Resorts World. The Whiskey Exchange has a holiday tasting on Thursday night at Glazier's Hall in London, and that's followed on Friday and Saturday by the Kendal Whiskey Festival in Cumbria, England. Buffalo Trace Distillery's annual Lighting of the Trace ceremony is also on Thursday night, and the holiday light display will be open each night through January 1st, with visits from Santa Claus on December 8th and 9th. Maker's Mark Distillery has special holiday tours on the 8th and 9th as well, along with a mulled wine and wreath-making workshop on the 10th. McTears has its final whiskey auction of the year on the 9th in Glasgow, Scotland, and Whiskies of the World is on the 10th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. If you're organizing a whiskey event, please let us know about it, and we'll add it to the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. The calendar is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
Hey friends, Gabriel Cardarella here again from Dewar's. The holidays are right around the corner. That time of year where each of us are looking for that perfect bottle of whiskey to celebrate with our friends and family. This year at Dewar's, we're making things extra special by offering personalized bottles of Dewar's or custom Dewar's labels. Just visit Dewar's.com and create your custom label or personalized bottle, and we'll ship it right to you or a special person. This year, let's celebrate the holidays with a bottle of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Earlier this month, Dunville's 21-year-old Palo Cortado finish won Irish Whiskey of the Year honors at the Irish Whiskey Awards. It's produced at Echlinville Distillery on Northern Ireland's Ards Peninsula, and the distillery's own whiskey will be coming to market soon. I had a chance to tour Echlinville with the distillery's Jarlath Watson during my recent visit to Ireland. The background noise you'll hear is the stills humming away. Tell me the story of Echlinville in your best elevator pitch?
Oh God, Mark, where do you start? Echlinville Distillery started in 2013. We were the first new licensed distillery in the north of Ireland for 125 years. And effectively we're a farm-to-glass distillery. So we have our own farm, we grow our own barley, we floor malt our own barley, we distill, mature, dunnage warehousing, and we do everything from start to finish at the distillery. So from ploughing the fields to wrapping the pallet, it's all done at Echlinville. We do things the old-fashioned way, we do things the expensive way. So it's traditional floor malting, it's dunnage warehousing, and yeah, that's what we do at Echlinville. You'll see our first Echlinville malt and pot stills hit the shelves hopefully next year. Our spirit is 9 years old currently. We haven't released any of our own spirit yet, but I think you will see a release next year, probably a 7-year-old of malt and pot still. And then as well as that, we have the Dunville's heritage brand that we've been working on for the last 10 years, doing high-end, old-world sherry and port finished whiskies to a very high standard, and really, really enjoying that project. And I guess that project has been great practice for Echlinville, for the real thing as well.
You mentioned that this was the first distillery in the north of Ireland. It really has sort of boomed in the last 10 years, hasn't it?
It has a bit. I think when we built our distillery, we were number 5, possibly 6. I think we're up to 45, 46 now. And like I was saying to you earlier, everybody's talking about the renaissance of Irish whiskey, the rebirth of Irish whiskey, and that is true. I look forward to 10 years from now, whenever we have 45, 50 distilleries that all have their own 12-year-old expression with their own unique stamp and their own unique story to tell. I think 10 years from now we will see the real renaissance of Irish whiskey.
Instead of everybody rebottling Cooley or Great Northern Distillery whiskies.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of that. I'm not against that in any way. You know, I mean, if you can take a Cooley malt, Cooley is one of the best malt whiskies in the world. If you can take a Cooley malt or a GND grain or a GND malt and add to it, build a story or build your own story around that, put your own unique stamp on it. I don't really, with my Dunville's hat on, I don't really have a preference as to whether whiskey is matured and finished in the warehouse where it's distilled or the warehouse 100 miles away. As long as it's a good cask, a good maturation, and the finish suits the whiskey and enhances it. So third-party bottling, be it Scotland, America or Ireland, there's absolutely a place for it. It is great cash flow for start-up companies, start-up distilleries. It's absolutely fantastic to give massive shelf presence on lots of different options for the consumer. And for us, it's like I say, I mean, it's been a labour of love with Dunville's, and it's been great practice. You know, learning the crafts of wood management, of cask maturation, of blending, learning all those things so you can apply all those things to your own distillate. You know, is very important for us.
How important is the tourism angle? You've just opened a small restaurant on site. You've got a small gift shop. You've got plans for more in the future. How important is tourism?
The tourism, I guess that depends on where you are. So if you're sitting in the centre of Dublin, in the centre of Belfast, or on the Wide Atlantic Way, you have a lot better opportunity to maximise the potential of tourism. Echlinville's down the Arch Peninsula. We're on our own farm where we grew up. We're really, really proud of it, but it's not currently it's not currently a tourist hotspot in the way that Bushmills or Tilling or Dingle might be. So while it's very important for us to get people onto our site, you can tell people a story or you can show them a story. And whenever you show them a story, they get it a lot more than telling them a story. So getting people on site to us is very important. So we do invest in tourism. We just had a lovely fresh coffee from our new coffee dock. And we're building a visitor centre next year, hopefully. So currently our visitor experience is very much on site in the distillery on a Friday and Saturday whenever the distillery's closed down. for production. So I guess for us it's still very important, but it doesn't have the same returns as it would have if it was in Dublin or Belfast or Dingle. So while it's important for us, yeah, I mean, it's important to get people on site and tell them that story. But I guess also, Mark, for every pound we have 5 places to spend it. You can spend it in production, you can spend it in warehousing, you can spend it in marketing, branding, or on tourist facilities. And we're always trying to balance that, that question too of where is the best. Because we're family owned, we don't have investors. We try and do it all ourselves, which means that there's only so much we can do. So we're always very careful of where we invest and where we spend that money. But certainly, as you see, we've invested a lot recently around landscaping of the distillery, paths and walkways and planting trees and the coffee dock to give the place a lot more curbside appeal and to get a lot more of the community onto the distillery. Not even to drink whiskey or gin, but even to walk around the distillery, dog walks, etc., etc. We're just trying to make ourselves more part of the local community also.
Tell me about the revival of Old Cumber.
Yeah, so I think we're experts now in reviving old Belfast and County Down blends. We had the privilege, an absolute privilege, of being the custodians of Dunville's. We consider ourselves the custodians, not the owners. Dunville's existed 190 years or 200 years before we had it. It will exist long after we're gone. So all we can do is take an old brand and leave it in a better place than where we found it. And I think with Dunville we've done that. We're very respectful of its heritage, of its history, of its place, and we try and do that justice. Old Cumber is something different again. Old Cumber is 12 miles from Echlinville. The Old Cumber Distillery was closed down in 1956. So Old Cumber is still living memory. There is people alive today who worked in Old Cumber, whose parents worked in Old Cumber, who remember Old Cumber whenever it was open. So we have to tread very carefully. It's that tread carefully, you tread in my dreams, that W.B. Yeats quote is very much resonant with Old Cumber. We got the brand last year. We have been double distilling pot still from inception in 2013. We have been making whiskey the Old Cumber way since 2013. We've been laying down the Old Cumber mash bill since 2018 in conjunction with the project with Fionnán O'Connor. So Old Cumber has been in our veins and in our distillery and our distillates long before we acquired the brand. Again, we're privileged to have Old Cumber. All our pot still will come out under the Old Cumber brand. So if it's grown by Echlinville, malted by Echlinville, distilled by Echlinville, matured by Echlinville, and it's a pot still, it'll come out in the Old Cumber brand, and you'll see that next year. And hopefully by 2025, which is the anniversary of Old Cumber from 1825, so it'll be 200 years old. So hopefully in 2025 we can reinstate a standard 7-year-old to the market for the first time in 75 years, which to us would be massive. Because like I say, we grew up with the legends of Old Cumber as our little distillery, so to bring it back to market in its true form it's an honour, it's a responsibility.
Now, you've already released a little bit of Old Cumber to the market with as a blend of pot stills, because your first whiskey from Echlinville will not be ready for a bit longer yet. When do you expect to release an Echlinville single malt?
So that's constantly been discussed and has been discussed for 3 years in here. We're not in any rush to release it. I do not like seeing whiskey go out too young. Not so much because it's not ready, and it's not ready, but you can only sell whiskey once, Mark, and if you sell it as a 5-year-old, you can't sell it as a 10 or 15-year-old. So it doesn't, you don't give it the chance to become all that it can be. So we're not ones for releasing whiskey before it's ready. We are privileged that we don't have to release whiskey at 3 years old, that we don't have to do that compromise, that we can be very uncompromising in our approach, and we are. That said, we have been working for the last year on both malt and pot still. And I do I do firmly believe that you will see both releases in 2023. You will see the first Echlinville malt come to market and the first Echlinville pot still come to market. They will be very limited quantities. They'll not be general releases. There'll be limited quantities because we're a small distillery. Like I said to you earlier, the benefit of not having investors and not having anybody bought into you or controlling you is that you can make whiskey without compromise, and you can make whiskey to very high standards. The downside of it is that you have to turn the stills off. So if you don't have the money, you literally turn the stills off. So probably for our first 5 years, we might not have ran the stills for 15, 20 weeks a year. We ran them when we could afford to, and that does lead to very limited supplies of the older stuff in our warehouse. So for the first 2 or 3 years, Echlinville malt and Old Trumber pot still will be available, but in limited numbers as we build that base up.
And there are some people who've been waiting several years for that first bottle, right?
There is. I think in 2012 or 13 we released a cash sale program, but we also released a bottle sale program where we pre-sold the first bottle of Echlinville malt and pot still. And amazingly, I think that offer was on sale for about a year and a half, and we pre-sold something like less than 100 bottles, maybe 60 odd bottles. I think that was out. If a new distillery announced today that we're going to pre-sell their first cask in 7 years' time and asked £110 for it, you'd probably get 6,500 applications. But it shows where Irish whiskey was back in 2012, that we only had 100 or 150 or 75 nuts. You know, people that were nuts enough about Irish whiskey to actually invest at that point in Echlinville and take the chance. So, yeah, so those guys that invested in 2013 or 12 will have the first call on the bottles, and then the rest of the cask will be sold on the day.
At a much higher price, I would assume.
At a price that would be reflective of today's market conditions, I guess. Again, it will also be reflective of what's in the bottle. It'll be a 6 or 7 year liquid. I can't justify charging multiples of hundreds of pounds for a 6 or 7 year liquid. Our first Old Trumber release was 99% our own liquid, and it went out at 65 quid. You know, it won't be 65 quid, but it won't be multiples of hundreds. It'll be reflective but reasonable.
Tell me about the history of Belfast in distilling terms, because Belfast was once larger than Dublin when it came to distilling, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess this is a history that a lot of people don't get about Irish distilling and about Belfast distilling especially, and probably where it sits in relationship to going from Irish pot still to Scottish malts and blends being the dominant force in the world. Belfast sat somewhere in between. So Belfast being probably 58 miles from Campbelltown but 100 miles from Dublin, northern distilleries always took as much influence from their Scottish cousins as they did from Ireland. We're proudly Irish distilleries. We proudly make Irish whiskey, but we make Irish whiskey we take influences from Scotland. So Echlinville double distills, and only double distills. What a lot of people don't know about the history of Irish distilling is that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, a lot of the northern distilleries embraced the column still before the distilleries in Dublin and Cork did so, probably 100 years, 50 years before. So likes of Watts and Derry, likes of Royal Irish, Dunville's in Belfast, Avonneal, Conswater, two modern grain distilleries built in the 1880s. So by 1900, Belfast was pumping out huge quantities of grain whisky as well as malt and pot still. We were making that much grain whisky that we were subsidising grain whisky into Scotland. So a lot of this grain whisky that was in Scots blends in the early 20th century was coming from Derry, coming from Belfast. And so Belfast embraced the column still and embraced grain and embraced blended Irish whiskies, a blend of malt and grain, or pot still and grain, long before Dublin and Cork did. And probably for the same reason then, they embraced brands. So while Dublin and Cork distilleries were still doing white labels and still selling their whiskey in barrel to pubs and etc. and third-party bottlers, the likes of Dunville were creating worldwide brands. Because the more whiskey you have, the more pressure's on the sales guy to sell it. So you have to create a brand, a worldwide brand. So Dunville's was one of the first true worldwide brands in Irish whiskey. And that was driven again by the sheer quantity of whiskey that was in the warehouse, drove that necessity to sell whiskey worldwide. So Dunville's had offices in 28 countries worldwide, 54 offices in 28 countries worldwide. Alfred Bernard in 1885 states that Dunville's had the largest warehouses of whiskey of anybody in the UK and Ireland. So they're pretty much the largest distillery in the world. And they had to sell that whiskey, so they had to create brands to sell it. So therefore you have Dunville's mirrors and Dunville's ashtrays and Dunville's pitchers and Dunville's jugs and, you know, all these techniques that were used 125 years ago to get your brand out there. You know, if you go back to the newspapers of the turn of the 20th century, they're filled with really innovative Dunville's adverts. So with grain whiskey came lots of whiskey, came worldwide brands. So Belfast led the way in building worldwide brands in whiskey, probably even before Dublin and Cork and probably before Scotland.
Thanks to Jarlath Watson for spending some time with us on this week's Whiskey Cast in Depth. Full disclosure, my visit was part of a press trip organized by the Irish Whiskey Association and Tourism Ireland. But as always, full editorial control over the content of this episode remains with WhiskeyCast. And that's WhiskeyCast in Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with a couple of the Dunville's expressions, including a cousin of that single cask whiskey that won Irish Whiskey of the Year honors. This one is a 20-year-old Palo Cortado finish, bottled for the James J. Fox Whiskey Shop in Dublin at 54.1% ABV. The nose has touches of figs, toffee, Christmas cake, cherries, and dried fruits. The taste is thick and fruity with spicy notes of clove and cinnamon, balanced by figs, toffee, and cherries for a well-rounded and robust flavor. The finish is nice and long with subtle spices and touches of Christmas cake and toffee. I'm scoring the Dunville's 20-year-old Palo Cortado finish for the James J. Fox Whiskey Shop a 94. Echlinville also bottled a PX cask version of that 20-year-old Irish single malt under the Dunville's VR label. It's bottled at 53.9% ABV, and the nose is full of Christmas cake, dates, honeycomb, dried fruits, and a hint of leather. The taste is thick and chewy with notes of baking spices, Christmas cake, dark fruits, and hints of raisins and dates. The finish is long and fruity with lingering spices, and I'm also scoring the Dunville's VR 20-year-old PX cask finish a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 100-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails, at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. I mentioned the new Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse Camp Nelson C bourbon a few weeks ago in the news, and received a sample of it recently. It's bottled at 56.2% ABV, and the nose is very aromatic with touches of caramel candy, dry spices, charred oak, and hints of honey and vanilla. The taste is spicy and well-balanced with red apples and black cherries underneath, along with touches of honey, vanilla, and tobacco leaf. The finish, long and dry with lingering spices, and I'm scoring the Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse Camp Nelson C a 93. Finally, And going back to last weekend in Fredericton for a moment, one of the highlights each year for me at the New Brunswick Spirits Festival is Frank Scott's Chairman's Dram tasting, where he pulls out whiskies from his own collection to share. That included this time around the Linkwood 30-year-old from Diageo's Rare Malts collection, released nearly 2 decades ago. It was distilled in 1974 and bottled in 2004 at 54.9% ABV. The nose has touches of honey, caramel, butterscotch, and just a hint of citrus. The taste, thick and oily with grapefruit and citrus, butterscotch, and a hint of anise, while the finish is long, dry, and mouth-coating with dry spices and hints of citrus fruits. I'm scoring the Linkwood Rare Malts 30-year-old a 95, and thanks again to Frank Scott for sharing it with us last weekend. The What I'm Tasting this week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,400 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Not to throw shade on other holiday gifts, but gift cards, really? First, you can't pour, sip and share them. And second, they're so small that you can easily forget about them. Wait, do people say that about me?
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Got this comment from Scott Glenn on the Jack Daniels lawsuit we mentioned during the news. He notes, "At first I thought this was silly, but the point about marketing to adults makes me think JD should win." And Scott Harris of Catoctin Creek added this comment from the perspective of a fellow trademark owner. "I think JD should win this suit. The problem is that a small brand of dog toys has won any success it's had in the market by leveraging the JD trademark, which it didn't pay for or earn. JD spent millions building that trademark, and to let someone use it for commercial purposes would A, weaken their mark, and B, should be compensated. As a small brand, if someone started making Catoctin Creek spoof materials, we would ask them to pay a license fee for that usage if we approve the usage. As the trademark owner, that's our right." What's your opinion? Are the Jack Daniels lawyers barking up the wrong tree, as someone else put it? Share it with us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast, or just email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Isla's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Every once in a while, the opportunity comes along to taste a truly rare whiskey. Sometimes it's a happy occasion. Other times it's clouded in tragedy, and that is the case with this story. In the pre-9/11 days, Beam had an office in Lower Manhattan, and it was Beam Global Spirits and Wine back then. A predecessor to Beam Suntory. It was still part of the Fortune Brands conglomerate. But one of the artifacts on display there was a bottle of Canadian Club that dated back to 1886. In the hours that followed the 9/11 terrorist attacks, CC's Tish Harkis was on the emergency response team based out of Walkerville, Ontario.
My role on that team was, the emergency team, was to find somebody from that office, that New York office, where we were about a mile or two, or a couple of blocks away from the site, Ground Zero. And I couldn't go home until I found somebody to talk to on the phone. And I finally found somebody in the evening, and everyone was all right. The building was fine. But then, a couple months later, it was announced that they were going to close. So the artifacts that the president over there took from Walkerville came back. which was very gracious of him. And in that box was a bottle of whiskey, Canadian Club whiskey from 1886. Now, it was Club whiskey originally, and as you know, it became Canadian Club in 1882. This is 1886. And going from the extreme cold into the extreme heat, the cork started to swell. Back then we were using original cork. The cork started to swell and it started coming up. And of course everybody was a little bit nervous of it because we still had bombs in our mind. And I said, what's going to happen? And he said, the master blender said, well, if we don't, we got to stop this because it's going to go bad. And so we ended up enjoying a few samples of that one. And that's the oldest Canadian Club whiskey I've ever had.
Thanks to Canadian Club's Tish Harkis for sharing her story with us on this week's Behind the Label. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
Friends, it's Gabe again, reminding you that one of the best gifts you can give this year is one that's double-aged. Visit Dewar's.com and create a custom label or a bottle of our 12-year, 15, or our 18-year and give a gift they'll never forget. Stay curious, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast. Oh. And equally nails, apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company.
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskeyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.